Bartholomew Town.
It's 2025, the year in review, looking back on some of the biggest and most impactful stories here in Rhode Island on Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew, joined today by the Boston Globe's columnist and author of RhodeMap Dan McGowan, as we look back on what has been a diverse year of stories with some major headline grabbers, and we'll get into some of the other stuff as well, some of the political stuff. Dan, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, Bill, thanks for having me. I will say I kind of feel bad that every year we do this, and it always seems like there's, right as we're doing it, the biggest story of the year happens, and then we're there left to kind of doubt, will it actually be the biggest story? I think there's no question that the terrible, tragic mass shooting at Brown will be the story we'll remember for probably the rest of our lives.
I think so, obviously, and it's one of those stories that's developing right now. We're recording this on December 18th, and as updates come in real time, I will be adding. So if you hear my voice right now kind of in an awkward way, either before or at some point during this podcast, it's because I'm dropping in to give updates as we get them. But Dan, let me ask you this. You wrote a column that was, it highlighted what I also observed on Saturday night, which was Brett Smiley, mayor of Providence, in this crisis management context, did a pretty good job. The story now has expanded into, a series of wild press conferences with media members kind of competing with each other. And more than anything, just a lack of clarity, as they still don't have they have not identified by name any person of interest. And they're really working with not a whole heck of a lot when it comes to what at least they've put forth in terms of photos and videos. Your take right now on this story as it currently stands?
Yeah, I should acknowledge that the column that I wrote would I probably would not have written it if not for on Sunday morning following the shooting, it looked as though that a person was in custody, and certainly what was happening behind the scenes. A lot of people were saying, yeah, we got the guy. This is a done deal. That being said, so just for timing purposes, I probably wouldn't have published that story if not for that breakthrough that turned out to not be a breakthrough at all. In fact, potentially was a setback of the case. That being said, having been there on Saturday night for multiple press conferences, and I hate to be overly defensive about this, but if you actually read the column, what I was kind of trying to say was, hey, Providence literally did preparation for how to handle a mass shooting. Literally, what does the firefighters and the first responders do when they walk into a setting like that? How do you handle victims, things like that? So I think it actually holds up perfectly fine in the sense that Providence was prepared for this. They did do due diligence and thought about how to do it. And I think the mayor initially certainly was clear and communicative about what was happening. I think that was needed. You could see a scenario where a different mayor, different kind of setting might be overly political, might be too overly emotional in those kind of settings. What we needed on Saturday night was someone, whether it was the mayor, a public safety commissioner, if the city had it, or a chief of police or whoever, to just give us kind of just the facts. Here's what's going on. And I think Mayor Smiley did that. Now, obviously, things have in many ways kind of spiraled, as we continue to not have, really very much information at all about this potential shooter. We have better but still pretty grainy video or images of person of interest kind of thing, but there's just a lot of questions still out there. And I do fear that while everybody's kind of keeping a upbeat tone in this investigation, I do fear to some degree that the further this goes, the more days go by, the less likely it is to be able to find someone. That's certainly something that I think it's natural to be worried about that.
It definitely is. And right now there's also some confusion around some of the timeline pieces. It's a little bit clearer than it was maybe a couple of days ago over a series of interviews and press conferences. but there is a lot of confusion about how in the world does somebody commit a mass shooting in the United States and then just disappear from security cameras altogether and not be able to be traced. And I think there's going to be a lot more questions about what the security apparatus is from Brown's standpoint, maybe even from a city and state standpoint. But, this no doubt, regardless of the outcome, is obvious in terms of the investigation, is a huge tragedy of epic proportions. Yeah. And I think, like you said, this is one of those stories, never mind story of the year, this fits into the category of station fire and will be an all-time tragedy and an all-time event, if you will, in a lot of people's memories, certainly those here in Providence and Rhode Island.
Yeah, and I think, it's the other thing that, there's been some coverage of this and some attention paid towards it, but it's worth mentioning, is that, in the absence of good hard facts about what's happening, we're seeing a ton of disinformation and misinformation just flying around. And the thing about this is that, let's just be, if we're honest about it, as journalists, we are asking a lot of the same questions at times that sort of the random people like Twitter eggs are asking. The difference is that we're trying to do it in a way that is respectful and honest and with some level of integrity, as opposed to just publishing everything the minute we have a thought in our mind. So when I think you just said before, how in the world could a mass shooter go essentially vanish after a shooting in 2025? Does that make us ask the question, was this a professional? Were there multiple people involved? All those kind of things. I think they're all perfectly reasonable questions to be asking. The difference, though, between kind of that disinformation and misinformation that happens online versus what journalists are doing is that we try at least our best to vet some of these things. We ask officials these questions. It's not just we're all taking our group chat and publishing it online every day or every hour.
Right. I think it's such a huge difference. And then sort of the last piece on that, it's been wild to observe something from my standpoint on places like TikTok especially, but really all over social media and Reddit and so on and so forth, and now even on some of the cable news. All of a sudden, Brett Smiley, Peter Nerona, President Paxton, on, they've become fodder for some of these, I don't even know what you'd call them, just some of these weird websites or performers on TikTok that identify, well, here's your far left mayor, here's your far left attorney general. What do they know? They're covering something up. And these are things that we're used to seeing other characters either on a national level or outside of here. And it's kind of surreal to see people that like you and I have known for in real life for way more than a decade, all of a sudden cast into this weird environment of conspiracy theories on an international stage.
Yeah, it's so strange. I got to assume that, let's call it in the last 5 to 10 years, any community that has dealt with anything even remotely close to this kind of tragedy probably deals with the same thing. They're the people closest to the people in the news, right? The reporters and things like that are probably all say, "Wait a minute, I can't believe they're casting this guy as that kind of person or whatever." So it's hard to be unique to Providence or to Rhode Island, but it is something striking. You think of these people not always in the best of lights, but it doesn't mean that just because Mayor Smiley can't do PVD Fest the right way means he's a far left. And in fact, the criticism of him is actually the opposite, right?
Right.
I think of this. I'm watching this a lot play out. Interestingly, with Colonel Oscar Perez, who is being lambasted kind of in the social media sphere as this DEI hire, when the reality couldn't be further from the truth. He was supported by the rank and file officers in his community. I mean, he is a cop's cop. This is a guy who has shot and killed someone in the line of duty. Now, that shouldn't be a measure of whether or not you're a good police chief, but for a lot of these people who think this is just some kind of paper pusher who who somehow fell into the job of police chief in Providence because we're a woke liberal city. I mean, it couldn't be further from the truth in the case of Chief Perez. Now, again, that doesn't mean that he's necessarily doing a bang up job here. We don't know. And until it is reasonable, until a person is caught, for everyone to be questioned and scrutinized and things like that. But it's the labels, as you said, that are kind of fascinating, because we know these people, and so we know what is real about them, what is not real about them, and a lot of the information that flows in, the further away you get from the Providence media market, the more false information, just flat out false information that comes out.
Yeah, no doubt. And lastly, on this, I think as we continue to watch it and monitor it, it's been interesting to see, even on a local level, who is committed to more of a fact-based approach or a critical thinker approach versus a, hey, this is my opportunity to shout my name and appear on CNN. I think it says a lot about the Providence media market, and this isn't even necessarily an outright criticism, but it has identified the Providence media market on a national stage as being filled with a lot of different types of voices, including people who are more social media performers than anything else. And yet they're side by side with Amanda Milkovich of the Boston Globe or Steve Klampkin of Latino Public Radio, getting equal time, asking questions oftentimes that take press conferences off the rails. So I think that has been an interesting thing too.
It has, and certainly as two guys like us who are sort of really close media observers, it's fascinating. It reminds me, and I don't mean to make light of it, but the thing that I keep thinking about is you and I, probably me more than you, but you and I are both have some affection towards professional wrestling.
Yep.
And, the saying about the, guy, particularly younger guys when it comes to, and gals when it comes to professional wrestling, is the people who move too fast, who want to get all their moves in and want to get, as much screen time as possible. And sometimes that takes away from whatever talent they have. I think you're seeing a lot of that. It's not uncommon necessarily, but it's just hyper focused in this moment of, you're seeing a lot of journalists who are, who really want to get the aha question in, not necessarily the gotcha question, though you're seeing some of that too, but just, who are kind of doing the same thing that we're all doing. Again, I go back to my group texts do not look the same as what I write about. That's or right. What I, or what I say publicly. And it's a lot of, we're becoming in some ways those online sleuths, and it's, hey chief, did you think about this thing? I think a lot of this, some of the AI generated enhanced images, which aren't especially helpful, I think there are a lot of people, including people in our industry, who think, boy, I wonder if they ran this through ChatGPT. And it's like, yeah. Guys, they have plenty of enhancement, technology to give us what they want. Now, it doesn't mean that we should be, and I think this is important, I reject the idea that you should only listen to the top officials who tell you what they want to tell you. Right. What I don't accept, so I reject that. I think it's reasonable to be asking questions. I think it's reasonable to be poking around yourself, things like that. Where what I just don't accept is this narrative that has really taken hold, that there's something being hidden, right? I mean, the idea that Peter Nerona and Oscar Perez and Brett Smiley and Christina Paxton are part of some, conspiracy to withhold information. I mean, there's no evidence that that's the case.
Right. It's just wild to see in real time. And the idea that these guys and women and everybody involved here wouldn't want to give as much direct information that could identify or implicate somebody. This is their case. This is in many ways their legacy. They're definitely not trying to downplay the opportunity to get an identification of this person at minimum. So it's a weird thing. Obviously, more than anything, it's a tragedy. And we'll continue to update you over the course of these days. And who knows? It's one of those things. Who knows how this is going to play out at this point? Again, stay tuned to the Boston Globe and WPRO and Bartholomew Town for the latest on this. All right, turning to what probably would have been the biggest story of the year, if not for the Brown tragedy. And that, of course, is the Washington Bridge. And look, This is a year that at one point there was a promise that we'd have a brand new bridge in 2026. That's long gone. Between everything that we saw this year with the oversight hearings in particular with Peter Alviti and his performance sort of juxtaposed against former U.S. Attorney Zach Cunha, who was retained to basically lead the oversight hearings for both the House and Senate here in Rhode Island in a joint oversight committee. Your takeaways on the status of the Washington Bridge as we wrap up 2025.
Bartholomew Town.
You've been hearing me talk a lot about Navigant Credit Union, and for good reason. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. You can learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by Newport Film. Check out newportfilm.com for all the latest screening details. Are you ready to take the next step in your career? At URI Online, we offer business and leadership-focused programs designed to fit your life. Whether your goal is to advance your career in fields like public administration, supply chain management, or training and development, our online programs provide the flexibility you need with the high-quality education you deserve. Learn from experienced faculty and collaborate with a network of professionals, all from the comfort of your home or wherever life takes you. Visit uri.edu/online to explore programs and start building your future today. URI Online. Learn anywhere with us.
Well, interestingly, if in 2025 there hadn't been that the report, that forensic audit, whatever you want to call it, and then the follow-up oversight committee hearing, I think we'd all be left in some ways understanding that this is still a big problem for anyone who ever has to wait in traffic. It's annoying, those kind of things. But if not for those two factors, this would have been almost like a waste of a year when it comes to this bridge. Not in terms of progress. I acknowledge and appreciate that the bridge has been demolished or mostly demolished, whatever it is, and that things are moving forward. I think that's all real. It's not fake. I think the way it's been communicated might be a little bit poor, but this might not be the biggest story. But then, this report comes out, and then you have Zach Cunha, the former U.S. attorney, coming in and really, I think, exposing Peter Alviti, one of the worst performances we've seen in front of the legislature in a long time. And that's saying something.
Yeah.
I think it really kind of rushed this right back to the top of the biggest stories, if not for the Brown shooting, because I think what it did was it brought back sort of everybody's kind of fury over what's going on. I think the fury with the Department of Administration, I think certainly the fact that we're quickly getting into a governor's race for next year, but you heard Helena Folks say, in her kickoff say, we're going to make a change at the Department of Transportation. We talked to Joe. We're taping in late December. We talked to Joe Shikarchi just this week, and he says he would make a change if he was the governor. And so now you have potentially two of the three most likely candidates to be or most likely next governors in some ways to say they'd make a big change at the Department of Administration, meaning getting rid of Peter Alviti. So I think this all rushed back as the biggest story other than the Brown shooting.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I think it's also been, it's one of those years where I think the chickens came home to roost a little bit from the initial rollout of the communications effort, for sure, and maybe just the overall management from the public standpoint of the bridge, because now it's starting to catch up. Look, on the onset, when Alviti said maybe a heavy truck went over it and broke it, and it turned out to not be true at all, I think there was a way to recover the public's at least somewhat faith that, okay, they're at least up there trying. But now you get to the point where the narrative of incompetence or dismissing outside experts or just a department that doesn't seem to function the way it should, all of those sort of Rhode Island lore pieces, the legacy challenges that the DOT's already had, married with the public's perception on the bridge from Jump Street, it all came to a kind of screeching crash at that oversight committee hearing, where anybody who did doubt those naysayers, and maybe someone said, well, I think they are doing the best they can. What can they do? They were probably persuaded by the performance of Alviti to say, okay, yeah, I don't trust these guys at all. I think it was a hugely damaging effort for the McKee administration, and no doubt they think the public's faith on this bridge and in government right now is I don't know if it's at an all-time low, but polls show it's not looking good.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, the polling, speaks for itself in a lot of ways when it comes to people's frustration with the bridge. I think to your point, the other factor here has been, this could have been a year without that report, without that, oversight committee hearing. This could have been a year where, sure, the average person was still going to know about the Washington Bridge because they wait in traffic, because it's a common complaint from lots of people. But we were quickly, I think, going down the sort of rabbit hole of reporters doing their jobs, but all of us and certainly non-reporters who are just kind of exposing things, we're going down the rabbit hole of very obscure findings. Ken Block, somebody who's a former candidate for governor on the internet, has been somebody who's been really trying to uncover lots of things. And while I totally respect and appreciate the effort that he's making, I think it was really inside baseball. It was really a lot of stuff that the common or the average person in Rhode Island probably wasn't thinking very hard about. And so it was, whether it was getting better or not for the average person, I do think it wasn't necessarily, this had the risk of just kind of falling down into being a reporter story, not a big, story that everybody pays attention to. And then again, it came all rushing back. And I don't know how you get past it at this point. I think the faith in Peter Alviti has been entirely lost. And unfortunately for the governor, that transitions or translates right over to him.
Yeah, and that leads to probably not what most people think of as the biggest stories of the year, but certainly the juxtapositioning that's happening for the 2026, particularly the governor's race, has been a major story. And I think something that's definitely of interest to our audiences who are listening on Bartholomew Town or WPRO. And look, the return of Helena Bonanno, folks, this time doing a lot more. I don't know if it's a lot more, but it seems like a lot more grassroots stuff. I keep bringing up that she's taking photos on RIPTA or whatever and posting it on Instagram. More than anything, though, this is about fundraising and network building. And so as we look to 2026, how big of a deal has 2025 been in shaping the governor's race?
Well, it's been everything that Helena folks could want it to be, and it's been everything that Governor McKee doesn't want it to be, right? So that's a pretty simple thing to say, but it's just true, right? Helena Foulkes has spent the last year raising more money than anybody. While Joe Shikarchi still has more money than her in his campaign account, Helena Foulkes has been a fundraising just a beast when it comes to fundraising. She's outraised both Governor McKee and Speaker Shikarchi in this year, and obviously she's a very wealthy woman. She has the ability to write a check on top of anything that she raises. And so her job this year was to, gradually become more of a public figure again, kind of re-enter. She had been doing this for a couple of years, but kind of re-enter the picture as somebody who, was going to get quoted in the news and whose opinion, to whatever degree it matters, was out there. But really her job was to raise a bunch of money, have a kind of flawless kickoff to her campaign, which she did. And then hope that Governor McKee does two things. One, hope that Governor McKee continued to, struggle when it comes to approval ratings, and then hope that he wasn't struggling so much that he would drop out of the race, right? A year ago, I'm sure you and I talked about it, but a year ago, I think I did the Channel 12, wrap up end of the year thing. And we were all speculating, do you think Governor McKee will stay in the race? That never left in 2025. Even when Governor McKee announced that he was seeking re-election, it did nothing to stop people, and still to this day has done nothing to stop people from speculating whether or not he'll be on the ballot next year. Now I think he will, but certainly there's plenty of folks out there who don't think Governor McKee has done enough in 2025 to repair his image. If anything, we were talking about with the Department of Transportation, the bridge has probably hurt it even more. And so, this has been this is a table setting year, right? It's not a policy year. It's not a year where the politicians whoever's running for governor are going to lay out everything that they want to do. We're still, as we talk in December of 2025, there hasn't been any real paid advertising out there yet. There was a little bit of the governor's kind of hit on Helena Foulkes on CVS and opioids, but that was not a TV commercial. That was online, and it faded as quickly as it lasted. And so, table setting year, and I think it has worked out incredibly well for Helena Foulkes. It has also, we should note, has worked out relatively well for House Speaker Joe Shikarchi, because if nothing else, he has kept his name out there and considered kind of the most viable replacement if Governor McKee were to drop out of the race. And he's not denying that he may even run even if Governor McKee is in the race. So It's been, in some ways, a good year for Joe Shikarchi, because there hasn't been, it's not considered, though I wrote a column about this and suggested it was starting to feel inevitable that Helena Foulkes may be the next governor. She has not, stormed away from the field. She's not, 60% in the polls or something like that. And so Joe Shikarchi has a reason to be happy and to continue to float his name heading into early 2026.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Some of the other major stories this year, I think it's of note for sure, even though it feels like it was inevitable and it was a long time coming. That's the departure of Hasbro, who are announced and are in the process of relocating from Pawtucket, Rhode Island, to the seaport in Boston. Again, this seemed inevitable. It seems, when you really look at the details from Hasbro's standpoint, it's not so much about, hey, Rhode Island is the worst place in the world. It's just we want to go be in a location that suits our industry and industrial aspirations, maybe more than Rhode Island. But it does speak to Rhode Island's inability to coalesce around Hasbro and find the magic ingredients to keep them here. How big a deal is this, either from a psychological standpoint, economic development standpoint, or political?
It's funny. I thought that this would be a bigger hit to Rhode Island's psyche than it has been, to be honest with you. Maybe it's because it played out for so long. I mean, the initial stories about Hasbro potentially leaving, were big, and it was a big kind of talking point in 2024, and then we just kind of waited, and we almost got kind of lulled into a place where once the information was official, once Hasbro confirmed that it was going to Boston, it was almost treated as though Yeah, of course. I thought they already announced that, and we sort of almost forgot in some ways about it. But I think it's a real blow, and I think it's the shame. One, it's a shame that Hasbro seemingly, I think, led people in Rhode Island, whether it was Providence or the governor's office and the Commerce Department, kind of led people to believe that maybe there was a chance that this could actually work out, and maybe there was some scenario where they would stay, or there was talk about maybe Hasbro will keep a division here in Rhode Island, things like that. So I think it put Rhode Island in a tough place to almost waste some time on not developing other projects, right? Providence was the 195 Commission was offering very valuable real estate. In Pawtucket, they were kind of holding off on redeveloping the Apex building, for the possibility that Hasbro might stay. And so I think that was a bit of a problem. And then when it comes to this idea that, boy, Boston just has so much more talent, our public officials should treat that as both a slap in the face and a wake up call, right? It is true. So Hasbro gets points for that, but this should re-motivate everybody to make sure that we have more people, more energy focused on, trying to have a workforce that is ready for whatever's next in our economy.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the biggest takeaway, no doubt about it. Tidewater Landing successfully opened. The Rhode Island Football Club played their first season there. I didn't make it out this year. I thought I would. I know a lot of people who go all the time. I don't know a lot of people who go on a casual basis. It seems like you're kind of either in or out, although obviously there are casual observers as well. Regardless, the project's off the ground. It came to fruition. The big questions are now, just broadly from a tax incremental financing zone standpoint, is this thing going to actually make money? And then are we going to see the developments, the pedestrian bridge and all the auxiliary developments actually come to fruition? You and I definitely are sports followers and know the story of quote unquote taxpayer funded stadiums and the surrounding. I mean, I lived near the Barclays Center and watched that debacle take place in terms of the housing and all of that and how long it took. Is Tidewater a big deal from the standpoint of, oh, good, it's open? Or is the story more, okay, now it's open and we wait and see where this goes?
Oh, look, I did go to a couple of games this year, and I wouldn't put myself even in the category of a casual follower of this team. I pay attention to it, and did, again, go to a couple of games this year. Took my kid. We had fun. We ran on the field. It's a beautiful stadium. New arenas are, right? New arenas, new stadiums. That's true in Worcester with the baseball team. It's true when Barclays was opened at the time. Whenever something is shiny and new, I think people feel okay about it. And so, unless you were living right around the stadium where you were dealing with pretty intense traffic a lot, and that was a common complaint, it'd be hard not to go there if you bring your family to a game and say, boy, this is pretty cool. It's nice. And, I think of it similar to the way I thought of going to Paw Sox games, back in the day, or in my case, I grew up in Connecticut going to New Haven Ravens games.
Look out.
I was and similar to you, a big sports fan who knew who the players were, right? I read and I did my research. I subscribed to Baseball America and knew who the prospects were.
Yeah, Baseball Prospectus up there on the shelf somewhere.
Exactly. And so, it was kind of this thing of, oh, that's fun. I want to go see this pitcher pitch because he might be in the big leagues in a couple of years or something like that. I don't think there is a similar thing here. I should say with that is, it's not as though I said, boy, I want to go root for the Paw Sox tonight, or boy, I want to go root for the New Haven Ravens tonight. It was more about players and things like that. Difference here is I think they're trying to develop a small but mighty following that really cares about pretty low tier professional soccer here. Low tier enough where you're not going to see a lot of these guys in the MLS or playing in the World Cup next summer, though I suppose there's potential for some of that, and especially on some of the kind of more obscure countries that are going to be playing in the World Cup. And so, it is. I think it's a cool place to go. It's fun. Catch a good game, have a beer, have a hot dog, whatever. All that is great, but I still have a lot of doubts about whether or not it's going to really spur a lot of development around the stadium. Now, you talk to the people in Pawtucket, particularly the officials, and boy, are they bullish about this. The folks at the Pawtucket Foundation. You talk to Allison Bologna from Channel 10, who runs a yoga studio in Pawtucket. I mean, these people really believe that this is going to be, this and the train station, of course, are going to be, catalysts for a lot of development in Pawtucket. I take them at their word. I'm actually, at times, in some ways, inspired by how much effort and energy they put into all of this. But again, I think we're all waiting to actually see it really come together because, it's just very uncommon to see, a real economic development strategy set up around like pretty, again, low tier professional sports.
Yeah, that's the big question. And we will see also potential changes coming to the USL, the league that the Rhode Island Football Club plays in. The landscape of minor league soccer in the U.S. is always shifting, and we will see how that plays out. Speaking to sports, a really terrible story this year, the hazing incidents. Of course, Smithfield, the allegations of anti-Semitic hazing against a Jewish student. Those players on the Smithfield football team, 5 seniors that admitted to locking that student in some kind of bathroom or locker and spraying them with Lysol, then down in Rogers, in Newport at the Rogers High School. The football team there, videos of a student with special needs being whipped, and other really horrifying videos by members of the football team. There were 4 arrests. This all led to a huge outcry and also a lot of defensiveness, depending on the standpoint of who you were and where you were coming from. You wrote a column that Rhode Island should have a death penalty for sports. I completely agree with that. The sports programs that are involved in this type of hazing. The reaction that you got to that column, I thought, was really interesting because it felt like more and more people were going, oh, yeah, we can't have this continue. We need to find a real mechanism, not just, all right, you're suspended for a game or the season's canceled and a JV game on Thanksgiving won't be played. There didn't seem to be real consequences all around in this. Obviously, some students were arrested, but what was the reaction to that column that you wrote on the death penalty for programs involved in hazing?
Yeah, I mean, we wrestled a little bit with the term death penalty because we worried that people might not quite understand what I was talking about, and that I was suggesting that somebody, a student should get the death penalty for committing some of these acts. And but I think the point I was pretty insistent that we use that term in part because I am a sports fan and I knew its connection to the SMU football way back in the 80s. And I think it was the right kind of tone to set. It led to Chairman Joe McNamara's, saying he's going to pre-file legislation, not quite to give schools the death penalty, but to have a more coherent policy on this. I think most people agreed with me, though I will say, admittedly, that some of the pushback that I got, you get, I think, as you deal with this every day because you have to do radio constantly. There's genuine feedback, and then there's kind of outlandish feedback. So I got some outlandish feedback in the sense of you're wrong about what happened in Smithfield. There was a lot of that kind of stuff. I would say the more legitimate or genuine critique or criticism that I got was to say, hey, do you really think that an entire football, program, should be shut down because of a couple of bad eggs? You know what that means for a school, a community, kids who might be on scholarship and all those or potentially be on scholarship and those kind of things, or be seeking a scholarship, I should say. I haven't been convinced. I'll say, if this is going to happen, if there's going to be these hazing incidents, I think you have to have very strong penalties for it because it's the only way to make it go away. Now, criticism, another fair critique is that the harsher the penalty, the more likely it's going to be to cover it up. Coaches are going to want to cover it up because they're not going to want to, be the school slapped with the death penalty and things like that. I hear all of that, but I quite frankly, I just don't care. I don't care about the coaches' feelings in this. And I think that, in these incidents, and you've described this a lot. I've heard you say this both on the radio and on your podcast, there are differences between good old-fashioned freshmen being, told to carry the bags of the seniors and violent or, just sort of bullying and hazing, those kind of things. I think there should be zero tolerance no matter what. But I think you're always going to have some level of freshmen got to do this or the new guys got to do this. I don't think it should ever rise to the level where anyone is put in harm's way. And I can't believe it's even a debate, because it should be something that kind of everybody can get behind. And do I think that it would lead to programs being shut down? No, but I think you'd eventually have it happen somewhere. And I think it would be a message to the entire state.
Yeah, I completely agree. Any other major stories that jump to the top of the fold for you?
No, I mean, we hit, I think, everything on that. I think the thing that I'm sort of watching from watching how things have played out in 2025 is just somebody who's obviously paid very close attention and lives in Providence, is sort of I think, a stagnant economic development kind of scenario in Providence where still don't have really many answers in the Superman building. That Providence Place Mall, a lot of questions about what's going to be next for the mall. And I do worry about those two and what it means for kind of the rest of downtown. Even the conversation around what are they going to do with a transit center for RIPTA and things like that. What does the future of Kennedy Plaza look like? The truth is, Kennedy Plaza looks a lot like it did 20 years ago when I moved here. There's been changes and some upgrades, but I mean, it does downtown. I should say, forget Kennedy Plaza. Downtown looks a lot like it did in 2007. Other than the fact that the 195 area is almost a new version of downtown, which is lovely, and you're seeing things happen there. But I do worry about some of these kind of big anchor tenants really having never made the recovery since the pandemic, and what it's all going to mean for that area kind of in and around City Hall and Kennedy Plaza.
Yeah, no doubt something to watch for. And it'll be a factor in a mayoral race potentially that we'll see playing out next year, and something that you can guarantee Dan McGowan will be all over, along with all the other major stories that take place here in Rhode Island and beyond. Dan McGowan, the Boston Globe. Make sure you subscribe to RhodeMap. That address is...
Yeah, RI News at globe.com, Bill. And thank you, and both to you and to all your many listeners out there. Have a wonderful holiday. Thank you for consuming the media that we try to put out as often as possible.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you as well. Dan McGowan, the Boston Globe. I'm Bill Bartholomew. This is Bartholomew Town, the Year in Review. Bartholomew Town is brought to you by Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, the University of Rhode Island Online, and Newport Film.